Hello everyone, this is Andrea Hiott. Welcome back, or welcome if it's your first time. This is Love and Philosophy Beyond Dichotomy. We take philosophy very seriously here, which means we actually talk about it in all areas of life and from all disciplines and all sides of all philosophical possibilities, whether that's continental philosophy or analytic or whatever you're coming from. It's all in here somewhere, but not in every show. So the kind of point here is that we're all coming from different positions, and sometimes you'll arrive and it'll feel very familiar, like butter. It's just delicious and easy. Other times it'll feel maybe a little off-putting, too sweet, too loving, or perhaps too scientific, too philosophical, too hard to understand. Part of this podcast is letting it be what it is, and sometimes being in the butter and sometimes being a little bit out of our comfort zone, which includes me too. And we've actually found that's a really exciting project. Also letting it be a little unscripted, even though we do a lot of research. I find that spirit and trying to be in the moment is important at this moment. Maybe later it changes, maybe we become more polished, but for now, we're just trying to be here now together and see what comes. And part of that is about care, about what do we really care about. That's the kind of conversations we want to have here, not just for the algorithm, not just famous people because they're famous, although there's plenty of people on here who are very, very well known in their field. The idea is, what do they care about? What do we care about? How do we have a conversation about that together that will help others understand that better? So that's where we're coming from, and I'm glad you're here. Today is one of those conversations that's about love of reading and writing and creativity. It's with a person named Alex Kostas, who is a writer. He's also a lawyer. If you've ever studied law or you know a lawyer, you know you have to be very philosophical to do that profession. Alex is a great writer. He's going to have a book coming out soon, and a lot of his themes have to do with pilgrimage and walking and moving. And if you know me and my talk about all the neuroscience in the hippocampus, I'm constantly thinking about thinking as a way that we move through the world, walking as a kind of thinking, and so on. And so Alex and his pilgrimage ideas really connect to me, and he reminds me here in this conversation of some books I read back when I was younger, when I was working at bookshops in Seattle, like Elliott Bay, or in the East Village in New York. Alex is going to tell us about his wanderings and wonderings around the world and how his family ended up in Singapore, which is where he's at now, working as a lawyer. We talk about walking, about freedom, about simplicity, about contemplation and how that's related to love. We talk about responsibility, what it means. Alex is a new father, and we end up getting to that, which is always a beautiful thing to talk about and fill into. Discernment, that's a word that comes up a lot here. It's an important word for Alex and his writing and work. It's funny because I was recently driving through Virginia, and I stopped at someone's house who happened to be a writer who had written about hitchhiking across the country in the 60s. So this theme of pilgrimage, of wandering, of moving through landscapes in different ways, be that physical, mental, virtual even, is really a theme that has been even more present in my life these last weeks. So I'm really happy to share this conversation with you and to introduce you to Alex if you don't know him already, and his wonderful Substack called Way Markers. If you think about it, as we move through the world, as we move through life, we have these markers. Sometimes those are physical, sometimes those are books, sometimes those are poems, sometimes those are songs, relationships. What are your way markers? It's interesting to think about, and some of these books we talk about here have been way markers for both of us. I'm really thankful he brought those books up. One of them is called The Cloud of Unknowing, from the 14th century, and then The Gentle Art of Tramping is from 1920-something, 26. And we're going to put both of those books in the show notes for you, the whole full PDF. If you want to read them after you hear us talk about them a little bit here, just go to the Substack or the YouTube video, and they should be there for you to read because they are available online. And the reason I met him is because I have a Substack called Way Making, which is my nerdy philosophical neuroscience kind of writings. Somehow we both have very similar themes about what many of you, if you listen all the time, hear me talk about is holding paradox or holding tension, and how that opens us up into a constellation of thinking without having to reject the either or. So actually, Alex is writing a lot about similar themes, and we do talk about that here. And that's how we met. Someone in the community noticed that we had these similar themes and put us in contact. So I love that. I love it when things like that happen. Some of the conversations we have here do end up coming from this community of people who introduce us or who introduce themselves sometimes even to us. So this is one of those. We do talk about care. That's kind of the theme of this season. Not sentimental care, but what it takes to really care about the life you're living and care about the ones and the people around you, and think of your communications, your creativity, your conversations as signs of what you care for and what that really means in the ways that we make the world and where we put our attention and what responsibility means. I did write down a quote or two from this book, The Gentle Art of Tramping. And by the way, tramping is like tramping through the world, like walking through the world. It's just an old term from the 20s that was used in, I think he's English, the author. But I did write down a quote that I want to share with you from that book. Here it goes. The less you carry, the more you will see. The less you spend, the more you will experience. On the road, the weak and strong points of character are revealed. You stretch out your arms for hidden gifts. You yearn towards the moonbeams and the stars. You listen with new ears to birdsong and the murmurs of trees and streams. So I thought that was a nice quote to go into this conversation together after hearing, and also just for your day. Hope you have some of those moonbeams or murmurs of trees or birdsong. And also maybe just go explore. Go 10 minutes out of your usual route, see what you find, open to new possibilities, or just read a book that you might not think you would normally read, or go read a poem if you don't normally read poems. Do something just a little off the beaten path and see how that feels and see if it opens you to something new. Or just listen to this conversation, which is probably a little off the beaten path. And I hope you enjoy it. I'm really happy to have met Alex, and I'm looking forward to his novel. Check out the show notes for links to his Substack and to all the other things I've mentioned here. Go to our Substack, Love and Philosophy, for links to the books. All right. Bye. Okay. Well, hi, Alex. Thanks for being on Love and Philosophy. It's great to meet you.
Good to be here too. I'm really looking forward to this.
And you're in Singapore, right?
I am right now in Singapore, yeah.
I want to hear how you got there, but first I want to hear how you became a writer. Or do you even think of yourself as a writer?
Yeah, I think I do. I mean, it's always a hard thing in this day and age where everyone can technically be a writer. There's no real barrier for entry. I haven't done much formal study of writing in some senses. I haven't got an MFA or anything like that. As part of my university studies, I did take some courses in writing, especially in poetry and in creative writing. But those were all undergraduate studies and not related to my profession. Though my profession is law, so I guess I am technically reading and writing all day, just a very different kind of writing. In terms of when did I first think of myself as a writer, I can't remember a time when I wasn't. Like, I'm one of those annoying kids who was always writing something in a journal. I'm one of those kids who used to, you read a book and then you like make your own kid version of it and claim it as your own. So my mom has somewhere buried in one of her boxes my original creation, which it definitely isn't by C.S. Lewis, which is The Tiger, the Wizard, and the Door, which is very different from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Um, so I think I was always doing stuff like that.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah, I can identify with that. And where were you growing up at? Because it's hard to tell, really, with you've been
Yeah,
so
the
many
accent.
places, your accent.
I was on a call the other day and someone said, "You have the most non-accent I've ever heard." And I was like, "Yeah." Um, so I was born in Canada and we moved around a lot as a family. So I lived in lots of different cities in Canada. But my dad's Australian and my mum's English, so I had this really weird accent. I actually got sent to speech therapy. We were living in a very small Canadian town at the time, and they'd never met anyone from not that Canadian town. And I got sent to speech therapy because my accent was really weird. It was this Australian English hybrid, and I was pronouncing words differently, obviously. And so they sent me to speech therapy, and eventually the speech therapist realized I didn't have a speech problem. I just was from a different, from parents from a different place. Um, uh, Yeah, but then so my mum's English. We used to go back to the UK a lot, and then I did all my university and initial kind of professional working life in Australia. So my wife's Australian. Um, and then I did lots and lots of travel and living abroad, and now I currently live in Singapore. So there you go.
But you work somewhere in other countries too, so you're very modern in a way.
Yeah, I'm lucky to make the most of kind of, the world we live in, which is it's very easy to pick up and move around, right? So
Well, speaking of moving around, Way Markers is how I found you because someone read you and me, and I have this love and philosophy project we all do, but then I have this little thing called Way Making. And so Way Markers is your Substack, and I have Way Making, and we were both writing about similar themes relative to kind of beyond binary or something like this. But I also then really found once these people introduced me to you or this person, you're writing beautiful poetry, fiction, nonfiction, a lot of different things. You're creating these kind of beautiful books. I mean, how would you describe what you're doing to people or what Way Markers is?
yeah, that's a good question. Well, maybe I back up a little bit. So I decided to start way markers. So I'd always been interested in creative writing, blah, blah, blah. You get involved in these different scenes. So I was involved in the kind of poetry scene in Melbourne, Australia in the kind of 2014 to 2020, the kind of pre-COVID years. Melbourne had extreme COVID lockdowns, so that kind of is a very natural break where things really stopped. Um, and I interned at poetry magazines. You're in this scene and it's a particular scene and it's, you can imagine anarchist poets and all that stuff, right? Um, and I won't make too
I
much fun
definitely
of it.
can. I think I
Yeah,
was in
it
that
was
scene
fun.
a bit in New York,
Okay,
like,
yeah,
a decade before you or something.
right. Melbourne wants to be the New York of Australia. So if you understand Australia, Sydney wants to be LA, Melbourne wants to be New York. Okay, and obviously isn't quite that, but it tries. Uh, but then I don't know, life got busy. I maybe got a little bit burnt out from the scene, and I was writing stuff that was really just writing for the sake of writing, which is nothing wrong with that, like art for the sake of art. But it didn't necessarily fully reflect the entirety of who I am and what I am interested in. Then in 2024, my wife and I quit our jobs. We're both lawyers. We quit our jobs, got rid of our house, got rid of our car, put everything on hold, and put our life into two suitcases and went on a kind of spiritual journey, pilgrimage through India, Nepal, Japan, and Philippines. So that was a really interesting time. So that went for about 8 months. Um,
That's
and
really interesting. Sorry, we have to
yeah,
pause there for a
well,
minute, maybe,
we can
or we can
unpack
come
that one.
back to it, I guess,
Yeah,
if you want. But
yeah, it was a
yeah,
fascinating time, and
yeah.
there's a lot that came out of that.
How
And
wonderful to have a fellow waymarker or way making partner. I mean,
yeah,
that's very special.
Wayfarer. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, totally right. So we're very aligned in that way, which is amazing. And in that time, I discovered Substack. I'd never heard of Substack, didn't know what it was. So that's 2024. And we were using it just purely as a way to send like a newsletter to like friends and family, but like what we were doing. That's
Mm.
all we used it for. And it was a different one. It was private. No one could find it unless we invited them. So it was very kind of just using it as a newsletter. But then obviously I found this whole world and I was like, this is amazing. This is like whole way of kind of communicating your writing. And it really got me excited about writing again because I had all these journals filled with things I was writing but hadn't done anything with. And then out of that came this idea of like, there's things I want to talk about and things I want to write about that probably skew more on the kind of philosophical, metaphysical, the religious, spiritual side of things, but are hopefully accessible to somebody who's maybe just exploring that. So not necessarily just pushing my own ideas of this is the only way to think about things, but here's what I found helpful. And I was writing a novel at the time. We could talk about that too. And in that novel, the novel itself is a pilgrimage journey, and it felt like we were on a literal kind of pilgrimage in a spiritual sense. I was writing a novel about a character on a pilgrimage in a different way, and then the point being of if you've ever done pilgrimages, or even if you've done like through hikes or big hikes, right? You've got even though sometimes you can feel a bit lost along the way, there's often are certain points where there is a literal way marker that points you physically in the way to go. And just having that sense that a lot of the things, like whether it was books or films or pieces of art or music, um, that I felt like, oh, actually, when you start looking back over your life, you realize these things were like way markers in terms of pointing you towards kind of more. and different higher things. Um, yeah, so I think that's where the idea of way markers came out is like, can I share reflections on things that I have found to be way markers for me, but also create my own way markers, things that hopefully will be that to other people.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
When you look back at what do you, I mean, what comes to mind as these kind of signs or cairns, or I mean, you actually put a lot of pictures of different sorts of way markers within in the work. Is there, I mean, even if we go back to the little kid who was being C.S. Lewis in a way, do you have a few kind of consistent markers that maybe even change as you continue on your journey?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely a few. I mean, yeah, the Narnia books are obviously a big one, but then like, have you ever seen the film Into the Wild? You know, big film. Um,
In the book. I
and
read
the book, yeah. So the book is written by oh, what's his name? That's bad.
Krakauer, I think, or
Krakauer, yeah. So the book's written by Krakauer, and the book is much less novelistic. It's much more nonfiction and an exploration of what really happened to Chris McCandless. Whereas the film takes it and makes it more novelistic, right? It's kind of like a story. Um,
or even poetic
yeah,
and
it's very well done.
suggestive and
Yeah, and
emotional.
it's separated into chapters, and it's well done. Um, and a great soundtrack. Great Eddie Vedder soundtrack. That is a film that I think, whatever point I was a kind of early teens, mid-teens when I watched it, and just like captivated me because I think that tapped into that very youthful urge of like to run away and explore and get out into nature and experience what is truth and all that, right? Like it's a very there's some kind of yearning in a lot of people for that, right? Which it explains a lot of why people do what they do. It's a particularly youthful kind of thing, right? Like I want to get away into nature, and I've always been someone who likes being in nature, being outdoors, doing hikes and camping and things like that. But what I like about Into the Wild is that it's quite cautionary, and that if you actually watch it all the way through and think about it and dwell on how it ends, spoilers to anyone who doesn't know, but it's not a happy ending. It's actually quite a tragic ending, and buried in that tragic ending, this kernel of, in his last days, which because they found his diary, Chris McCandless's kind of realization of being a kind of lone wolf and being out by himself in the middle of nowhere actually kind of destroys any meaning of his life, that actually you can't experience joy and happiness without sharing it with other people. And so to me, that's one of those ones that you can take it as a way marker on one hand to say, get out, explore life, don't stay safe, don't conform to society, don't conform to materialistic society, especially. Get out and seek truth and seek beauty, which is true. But kind of temper your youthful enthusiasm and maybe your own ego and your sense of, I can do this all by myself. Um, the value of other people and the value of other people as way markers. Because when you watch the film, the recurring theme is there's all these people who are trying to help him and try to be to him what maybe he didn't get from his own family, but he rejects it ultimately because he just wants to be by himself, and which is actually kind of a cautionary tale if you think about it. So that's a classic one for me that I often kind of come back to. Yeah.
I love that movie, that story for many reasons too, but also I think it's really interesting what you brought up there, the learning that we can do, because I think a lot of us do have that feeling of almost wanting to get away, and you think of it as being alone, to get away from whatever is constraining you, especially if you feel like you don't really fit in with kind of what's around you and you think there might be another world where you feel more normal or natural, which is often the case, right? We have to find where we feel that. But yeah, holding that can be so hard when you're young. Like you feel like you need to go extreme, but how to hold that cautionary, that's the word you used. I think that's really, really such an important thing to be able to learn, is how to hold that tension in a way. And I think I feel that in your work with when you're writing about the binary kind of stuff a bit. Is that something you've learned over time through these kind of way markers, do you think? The one you just expressed, or being able to be in a place that's a little uncomfortable but still explore the edges and be
Yeah.
cautionary?
Yeah. Well, it's like, right. I mean, I think it's maybe less from stuff I've read, but just even personal experiences I've had. I mean, and I guess, you have personal experiences, you realize that the world does not fit into neat categories. You realize that things are much more like in real life, things are much more complicated than you ever thought. Especially the thing is of like, I always think the first thing is to get out there and actually do stuff because you're never going to learn any of this by sitting by yourself and reading books and watching films. You do actually have to get out into the world. You do have
Which
to.
can just mean going right out your door and talking to people,
Exactly.
by the
Yeah.
way. But yeah,
Doesn't mean traveling overseas. It's just
no,
getting out
just
there.
put yourself into situations and talk to people. Yeah.
Totally. Get out there, do something a little bit outside your comfort zone, whether it's, talk to people, walk around, whatever it is. Some kind of thing that fits into the loose category of adventure. Get out. But once you're out there, then you realize, yes, all these preconceived notions I had kind of don't quite perfectly map to the real world. People are much more complicated. The world is much more complicated. The world is much more strange and metaphysically difficult to comprehend, right? So you get out there and you realize that, and I think I'm now just coming into the age where I feel capable of writing the kinds of things I do. I think if I tried earlier, it would have been shallower and more trite, and probably as I get older, I'll think the same as what I'm writing now. But um, that sense of like, okay, so things are not as neat as say the internet would have you believe, and any thing that comes up in your life, people are going to say, well, it's either this or it's that, and it's just as simple as that. Or there's going to be other people saying, oh, nothing matters. You can just do whatever you want. Nobody should tell you what to do. The choices are infinite. And you kind of go through real life crises, and everyone has their share of crises or difficult things that they go through, scenarios they didn't expect. And you realize that it's kind of both and neither of those things, that some situations there is a clear right choice and you have to make it. It's the hard choice that you have to make. Some situations there is no right way and you've just got to pick one and you've got to kind of roll with the punches. Like it that there is a binary in a sense, but the binary is a much more higher meta level binary, which is like some things are quite simple and some things are quite complicated, and you have to understand which part of the trail you're on. And I think that's what I read about in that article you're referring to, which is like it's not a question of always applying one framework to every situation. It's a first higher level question of discerning, okay, what kind of decision is actually in front of me? Because people try to set up, and the world tries to set up, and even our own brains try to set up false binaries all the time because it's easier to have a binary to say it's either this or it's this. But often there's more than two choices. And so you have to kind of do that first step of saying, oh, whoa, what actually am I deciding here? Right. So I think that goes to what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of overlaps. I'm thinking about something I think you write where you're on maybe an ice sheet or something. I don't know. Where you're looking at kind of the top of the mountain and you're realizing there's, you could go a million different paths, right? But you're going to end up at the same peak in a way, but not really too. I mean, because this is something I write about too, about there's many paths up the same mountain. It's like a recurring theme that people think about. And each path you take is going to be a different experience. So you're going to have a different experience of that landscape, but you're sharing the landscape. So I think there's something very hard when we're young where we feel like we have to be really extreme, or maybe we want to be famous, like so everyone will like us. We're going to be a famous writer, and there's one path to do that, and it can be very emotional or whatever. And I guess what books and philosophy and living, being alive, having kids, whatever it might come, you start to realize exactly what you just said. I like to think of it as like trying to constellate. I mean, this is a little bit too philosophical, but thinking of it more like constellations of possibilities instead of either or always. So you always can see an opposite to wherever you are, but there's always all these other options. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. And also that, am I remembering that image right of
Yeah.
something? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I took that image from, I've had this actual experience. So on during our honeymoon, I promised my wife an overseas vacation. We got married during COVID as it happened. So we literally couldn't leave Australia, because of COVID, right? Flights and everything. So I took her to Tasmania, which technically counts as an overseas vacation because Tasmania is an island off Australia. So I
Very
technically
smart.
win that one. Yeah, yeah. But Tasmania is full of amazing nature and hiking. You should go if you haven't gone. Half the island is national park. It's incredible. And so one thing we did on honeymoon is we hiked Cradle Mountain, which is this incredible place to hike. And it's the middle of summer, so it's like middle of summer in Australia, which is the opposite to the Northern Hemisphere. But we get to the top and it is like covered in snow and ice because Tasmania is kind of wild, even though it's summertime. All the weather comes from Antarctica, so you just can never predict what you get. So it's snowing and ice up there. We go to the very top and the trail just ends. And it's what's called a Felsenmeer, which is basically where snow and ice is retreated and left as like a rock field. And these rocks were quite big. They're like boulders. And there's just no path anymore. So it's just like, you know that you're trying to get to the peak, like that's the goal. And then my wife, who's slightly less confident than I am, was like, "Oh, where do we go?" And I was like, "Oh, just follow my footprints in the snow because I'm going to go first. And you can just follow them." But obviously, the problem becomes I'm much taller and have much longer legs, and feel much more confident. So I'm striding along, and I look back, and she's completely freaked out, gripping to the boulders, and she's like, "I can't follow your way anymore. I'm going to have to figure out my own way." And so that inspired what I think I wrote about in that essay, which is that point that you get to certain parts, certain situations, certain parts in the trail, certain parts of the journey. And now I'm speaking more kind of metaphorically, but in your life. And you have to understand that sometimes there won't be a model to follow that you can kind of mimic someone else's journey or someone else's life. Exactly. You can both aim for the same place. And even if you're kind of traveling that way together, say me and my wife, in a literal sense, we're traveling together, but in our lives, we're both hopefully traveling generally in the same direction. Otherwise, that would get very difficult. But we can't always go the same way. We can't make the same cognitive leaps. We can't feel the same emotions. So you can hopefully align on, okay, we're actually both trying to get to that peak. That's where we're trying to get. Um, but we might have to take slightly different ways to get there. And no one way is going to be the right way. No one way is going to be the same way. Now, the danger is that I think in this kind of postmodern world that we live in now, we've stripped away a lot of kind of set narratives and meanings and kind of it's very individualized. You then apply that framework to every single decision, and I don't think that actually is helpful either, because then you're just completely solipsistic, you're completely individualized and atomized, and you have no community. So I don't think that's not what I'm saying, but I think there are times and seasons where or situations where you do have to just figure it out for yourself, and you can't just kind of coast on someone else's trail. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also realizing we are sharing the landscape. I think sometimes we go overboard and think, oh, it's all a hallucination or it's all a completely different landscape that everyone's in. And
Yes.
actually, that misses the kind of beauty of the fact that we are here to share the different ways we're seeing the same landscape, which, yes, it's not exactly the same for you or me, but that's the beauty of what we can share together. Or, all of us, whoever we are, writing books or whatever we do. I mean, any conversation we have, we give this gift in a way. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. You use the word discernment, I think,
Yeah.
which kind of points to this. Yeah, what do you mean by that word, do you think?
I'm trying to use discernment as that higher level thing of like before you even make the decision or make a choice, think about what is the choice, right? So don't just get fooled that every choice is a fork in the road, even to pick A or B. Not every choice is that. But also don't get fooled that every choice is like, oh, it's an infinite landscape that we're all sharing and I can just go whatever way I want. 'Cause I think I use the counter example of if you're on a very thin, I've been on hikes where, you kind of have these hikes where you're on a very thin ridge line and you want to stay on the ridge line. Obviously, if you go, the ridge line eventually leads you to the peak. Um, and it's kind of tricky because you're delicately balancing on this ridge line. And if you've got friends saying, "Oh, it doesn't matter, anyone can go any way," but all the other ways are down, which is not up, it's kind of not true that you can just go any way that you want because you won't get to the thing that you're getting to. You will just go down into the nice, pleasant valleys, and everyone can do their own thing, but that's not actually going to get you where you're going. So, um, that's probably where I think the discernment comes in. Is like, actually, is this a choice where all paths will genuinely lead me to the same place ultimately? I've just got to find my way. Or is this a situation where everyone's saying, or different voices are saying, oh, it doesn't matter, just do whatever you want. And I think actually no, but that won't get me any closer to my ultimate goal, right? Whatever that goal is. So,
I think that speaks to the embodied aspect of it too. I mean, coming
mm,
from philosophy and neuroscience, I have to think through those lenses. That yeah, because we are different, literally spatiotemporal bodies, we might even see what's possible in a different way. So, the goals that you see might not be goals for other people, but that's
yeah,
why you can't necessarily take those other paths, or you have to. I call it holding the paradox, being able to discern in that way, but still make a choice and not necessarily, think you have to only stick to that choice. So this is a really hard idea that we're all trying to maybe figure out now, and it seems to be becoming even more important, as you write about too, in terms of the way our technology kind of tries to rut us even more into this more binary mindset. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit. And I'm also interested in just the way that, I said at the beginning how you're doing so many things with poetry, with fiction, with nonfiction. with photography, I think even and art, and I wonder if that is also a way of keeping this mindset in play, this kind of way of keeping these many different paths or something like that. I just want to put those two things out. You can take either one of them, but
Yeah, no, I can touch on both of them. I think, yeah, definitely the point that our technology that we all are using, we're using it right now, is literally built on binary systems. That's how computers work, right? So it's a series of logic gates that go 0 or 1, yes or no. That's how everything works. That I think does have downstream effects in some way, which is we can see it in the way things have become more polarized. We can see it in the way that things are fed to us, um, different forms of information, how we can live in kind of alternative reality universes depending on our algorithms. All that stuff to me, I think, is downstream from the fact of we've built technologies and a way of thinking and economic models, whatever you want to say, which are kind of built off black and white binary systems where everyone can say we know the world isn't actually as simple as that, and yet we kind of build systems off that because it's easier. So I think that definitely has negative effects that you have to kind of be mindful of, um, and caution against kind of when things seem too simplistically binary, just to stop and think. It could be that that decision or choice in front of you is literally binary, and you shouldn't just pretend that that's not possible. But that's one of many ways that you can make that decision. It's like you look at different indigenous cultures. It's not that they didn't have the concept of black and white binaries, but many indigenous cultures, kind of outside of the kind of Western rationality, Western Enlightenment, thought of different ways of thinking, right? And so it's not that we go completely against the concept of binary thinking that it just doesn't exist, but it's knowing that it's one of maybe a constellation of ways that things can work. So that's that side of things. In terms of, yeah, my approach, I've always been uninterested in getting pigeonholed into one kind of writing. So that's just me. And so when I started Way Markers, I thought, I get to decide what this is. And I'm gonna purposely set out to I call about I say it like I'm braiding three threads. I'm braiding the thread of fiction with the thread of poetry with the thread of essays, ideas. Um, and is it possible to have a journal that does all three and people still want to read it? At the moment, the answer is yes, which is nice. Um, it keeps it interesting for me because it's just different formats. And also, I think it escapes something that I sometimes I'm gonna use an Australian word. Something that I whinge about a lot. I don't know if this translates. You know, the Australian concept of whinging is very, very useful, which is kind of just moaning and complaining without doing anything. Um, it's very easy now. We have, centuries of great literature and works of art behind us, and we can get into this kind of recursive spiral where we spend our times debating, reviewing, redebating, re-examining great works of the past, which is obviously important. And yet nobody's creating anything new on top of those kind of great works. That idea of standing on the shoulders of giants, you actually still have to build something new off those shoulders, not just constantly re-examine the nature of the giant and what is the specific aspect of this giant that makes it so much better than the other giant, and so on and so forth. So with the poetry and fiction, it feels like I like reading poetry, I like reading fiction. I could just talk all day about the poetry and fiction that I like to read, or I could try creating some of my own, that obviously builds off what things I like to read, but hopefully is in some way creating something new. So yeah, I think that is part of the practice for me is like don't just get stuck in a reviewer's spiral, but actually try to contribute and move things further. And then I think that's the application of the ideas that I'm often my essays are just things that I've been thinking about, and by writing about them and fine tuning them, I actually make them clearer for myself. But then applying those ideas, one in my own embodied life, but I'm not a vlogger, so no one gets to see that. And then, but in fiction and poetry, there are chances to apply those ideas in different ways that maybe touches someone a different way. I don't know for you how much poetry or fiction you read, but for me, a really good poem can really change the way you think or see the world. There's a kind of to me a good poem has a spiritual aspect to it. And then fiction, I mean, I think we are inherently storytelling creatures, so a good story, it kind of gets into your bloodstream. You kind of, it gives a narrative structure to things that I think for whatever reason, our brains do like narrative. They like causation, and therefore that happened, and therefore this happened, right? And so I think sometimes a better way to communicate than just a nonfiction essay that says these are some things I'm thinking. So yeah.
Poetry is very important. I actually often read poems on this show, kind of at the end usually or something. And yeah, I was also a young poet in New York. So it's very important. I think it's a very different opening of what the body is and what you can be and feel. I almost feel like right now poetry is almost the most important thing, at least. I don't know. We need that. But yeah, it's interesting what you said about the binary too. I think that's very important to understand. Contrast is real. It's not that you say there isn't binary or there isn't contrast, but also that, it's that both and either or at the same time kind of thing. That
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what I feel like is very hard. And poetry can do that without having to put it in those words, which is why it's so wonderful. You can sort of feel it, and I think music too. You seem to be very inspired with music. I think music can also open and hold that space in a way that's I can't really put into words right now. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, totally. Because music also, I mean, music operates on a level beneath language, right? Like it's rhythmic and it works off vibrations, which our bodies are full of. Literally, our hearts are beating, blood is pumping, things are moving. So it definitely see that how music can touch something that kind of language never is able to perfectly encapsulate. Like for me, if you were building it, it's like if music is that kind of foundational, it's math put into, so math, which is, obviously our universe can be really understood through math to an extent, and that's true. And music is a form of math that operates kind of pre-language. Poetry to me is the most basic level of language where you can really drill things down to a few words and somehow, in that kind of very quantum physics way, pack a whole bunch of almost like a universe into a poem. Because there actually is so much left unsaid that allows, in a good poem, the amount that's left unsaid allows the reader of the poem to kind of read into it their own experiences and understanding without fully destroying the meaning. Like the worst poems are just like abstract art to me, where I'm like, you can interpret it any way. It's just sound, and therefore it kind of doesn't have a great use. But a really good poem finds that tension, but without being ridiculously didactic and telling you exactly what to think. Acts as a kind of framework or trellis for a plant to grow up, right? Where the plant still grows, so the reader still experiences the poem in their own way and imbues it with their own meaning to an extent, but the poet is still setting some boundaries for us. And then obviously fiction and nonfiction kind of build off that. But I agree with you that musicality. Sorry, I'm going to ramble on, but that reminds me too. And this is a really good piece of writing advice. It's C.S. Lewis who talks about Rebecca C.S. Lewis about reading what you've written out loud, because ultimately, most people, not everyone, most people, when you read something, you actually are hearing a voice in your head. And the language of that, the music of that language, sorry, does make a difference to how you experience it. So, which again comes back to the point of how important rhythm and music is, right? Which is it's a funny thing. Like, why should it make a difference what symbols on a screen or a page sound like in my head? But still, that is how we experience language and how we experience the world, which is pretty interesting.
That's a great point. I even read philosophy papers out loud because I find, first of all, you just notice things differently because it's almost like, how when you write something, it looks different after you've sent it to someone.
Yep.
Um,
Every Substack essay I publish.
and then it's completely, you're like, oh, I completely missed all these
Yeah.
things. Yeah, it's just reading it out loud can do that too, but also the way you just said yeah, it's different. But I wonder if you ever studied philosophy or read philosophy in any of these journeys of yours, or do you think of yourself as philosophical in a way? Because there's a lot of philosophical questions here. I mean, I can see why someone put us in touch.
Yeah, I think in an amateur way, I think any kind of serious thinking you do, you end up brushing against philosophy, right? So a lot of my philosophy came by way of kind of religious background, but always been interested in philosophy and reading philosophical work up to the extent that I'm kind of mentally capable. I have my little pet theory is that in at least common law countries, so countries which basically the law develops by case courts making decisions, so not like a Napoleonic system, which is, codified fully, but so the US is one such system, Canada, Australia, UK, obviously, Singapore is too. because these are countries where the law develops over time based off judges, and judges end up obviously being influenced by the culture around them, etc. I think being a lawyer in those countries and studying law, you end up, it's essentially applied philosophy because ultimately you go back to first principles every time. So you can often, I have this in terms of what I do, you can often reason your way to a legal position that is, I'll make say 90% accurate in that country by kind of going from first principles and reasoning your way through kind of philosophical methods towards a certain answer about what should happen in society. So law ends up being an applied philosophy in that way, which is probably why I enjoyed studying it. Um, but yeah, I think probably going in that journey through India, Nepal, Japan, and then Philippines led me to read and engage more with kind of Eastern philosophy, which is also very different to my own cultural background. So I think that's also been interesting in the last few years, and I've kind of continued reading things from a very different that kind of very different school, right? So
You also ask these very big questions. I think of Descartes even with the, about God and what does God exist? I mean, and also Thomas Merton, for example, maybe, or St. Augustine, because you write about love and what is unselfish love. These are pretty big questions that I think a lot of people ask. I mean, they are sort of part of our life, even if we don't think of them philosophically. Do you think your writing, your exploring has helped you in the way we were talking about before come to a way of addressing or asking those questions without necessarily answering them the ways that would be kind of from the past, this way or that way only?
yeah, yeah, I definitely think so. I think it's made me, I think, say Merton. Um, in Japan, I visited DT Suzuki's museum,
Oh,
and
wow.
so
Oh, I'd
Merton
love to
and
do that. Yeah.
Suzuki, yeah, it's worth going to, very worth going to. I mean, even just as a physical place, it's extremely, without getting too mystical, it's extremely potent a place.
Mm.
You
Places
feel
can
it.
definitely be like that. I know what you mean.
Yeah, I've had experience. I mean, I one time stayed at a strange little, actually, it's a convent, I suppose. I don't know. It's a strange little place outside of Darmstadt in Germany, which is had a similar um, feeling to it. Though that was probably slightly different. Anyway, so this place, so Suzuki, for those who don't know who are listening in, so Suzuki and Merton had lots of dialogue. So Suzuki was probably for his time the kind of preeminent scholar of Zen Buddhism for the West. So he was very good at kind of translating Zen Buddhism, which really found its maturity in Japan, um, for kind of Western audiences. And he was quite the celebrity of his day, which I hadn't realized, but kind of extremely popular and lived to a very old age. And then we've got Merton, who was a Catholic priest, but very interesting thinker, kind of very liberal thinker for his time, especially for being within the Catholic Church at that time. And very interested in. So the book, The Zen and the Birds of Appetite, is a kind of dialogue between the ideas of Zen Buddhism and Catholicism, and specifically Catholic mysticism, which Merton was very familiar with, and how closely they kind of come and maybe touch at some points and maybe don't touch at certain points. And it's worth reading. I really enjoyed it. I don't pretend to be a philosopher or have any formal study, and yet I found it absorbing and interesting. So I think anyone could read it and find something there. Um, so where were we? So yeah, so I think those kind of things I think open you up to this idea that okay, my particular view on the world that you're born and raised with, which all of us have, is not necessarily wrong, but it is just one window into kind of understanding people, the universe, cosmos, whatever you want to call it. And so reading those kind of books where there's kind of a conversation happening from maybe a tradition you're more used to, and then leading you towards maybe things that you're not so used to, but seeing where they touch and don't touch does help you kind of think of different ways to ask different questions, and maybe leads you to some answers. Like I think for me at the moment where I sit, I think I see Zen Buddhism and even Taoism as very helpful in terms of how to live your life. I think they are. I think that's undeniable. I think they arrive at some conclusions about the universe and our place in it that I don't know that I agree with, and I don't see I don't see necessarily the benefit of following that all the way to its conclusions for myself. But that's also obviously knowing that you're biased towards the things that you know and maybe fit with your culture best. But it's certainly helpful here in Singapore, where Singapore most people are Buddhist, right? At least culturally. So yeah, so I think that's right. I think you allow yourself to be open to engaging with other things without being completely like slapping a coexist bumper sticker on your car and saying everything's equal, everything's exactly the same. Um, you can see people who are much more invested in these discussions maybe than you are right now, actually engaging in these things and following along those arguments and seeing how they hit you and kind of where they change the way that you think, which I think is helpful. I think it's healthy.
Yeah, kind of that mountain image that we brought up before seems pertinent here, that you can sort of think of it as trying to, you see the goal a little differently, but we're sharing this and there's different ways to get there and we have to find our way. And also, I think with, at least for me, the Taoist or the Buddhist, having kind of come up in a very Christian household, that was a really beautiful contrast for me in a way that did sort of open into constellatory way, more constellations, because it kind of helped me hold, there's something about those and even the writings that you were speaking of where you can, there's a poetic kind of feeling to it. They're not necessarily able to express with words, but the Tao, the way, or whatever, you can feel that place where you can hold a lot of tensions without losing the rigor, which is, I think, what you were speaking to before of what poetry can do. I think that's one reason I want more scientists to read poetry, or I think it's very helpful as a scientist to read poetry, because you can start to understand that you can be much more precise and rigorous at the same time that you actually open the space of possibilities. It's a very hard thing to do, but I do feel that a bit with these kind of readings like Taoism and Buddhism. I wonder if that speaks a little bit to what you're thinking of, or if that
Yeah,
brings.
totally. I think it brings a bit of a humility to you, right? Because I think we naturally gravitate towards feeling like we understand everything. Um, and
It's
so
kind of
you kind
safety
of
too, right?
it's
You want
safety,
to
but I
feel
think
like you
it's
know the right way up the mountain, and so you can go.
totally. And most people will tell you, "Hey, this is the way I walk. It's the best way. Do what I
Yeah,
say."
this is the right way.
Yeah, and that's, these are the communities, these are the families we grew up in, and not that that's wrong per se, but there has to be some element of humility of realizing, well, probably we don't. Each one of us probably doesn't have the whole answer. That would be unusual. Um, and surprising. It's even like, so I read The Cloud of Unknowing
Mm.
last year when I was in Korea, funnily enough, and it was very foggy while I was there, so it felt very pertinent. There was clouds everywhere.
Oh.
Um, I mean, The Cloud of Unknowing, the concept of God is basically f completely unknowable. That you basically, I mean, so Cloud of Unknowing is it 10th century? It's very old English text by an unknown monk writing to a junior monk about what does it mean to fully engage with and understand God. And basically, this monk is like, you can't do it because God is infinite. So there's no point trying to kind of imagine a physical person God, but actually experience the joy of being under this kind of cloud of unknowing that actually, I mean, part of the argument would be if you actually could experience God in his fullness, you would be completely obliterated. And it's funny, you take that concept, which I think basically, kind of makes sense once you kind of start thinking about God and how it works. Um, but then the kind of Buddhist concept of God is essentially um, almost the concept of God as an infinite light versus God as an infinite void. Kind of, I mean, I think Merton makes this point in Zen and the Birds of Appetite. Like, is there any real practical difference if God is kind of the absolute emptiness of nothing before all creation begins and all creation ends, or God is this infinite, powerful light that you can't ever fully comprehend? To us, there's not practically there's not much difference in terms of my experience of God. Maybe we experience aspects of God in different ways, but um, experience God through the universe in different ways. But in terms of God, um, in its totality, in his totality, and so I think those things are helpful, right? Like you say, even from a scientist point of view, that humility, well, any of our point of view. I mean, I think we live in a very scientific age or scientism age, right? Where everyone kind of thinks, most people in Western countries think through the frame of science. This is how we've been raised. That's the triumph of science, right? Which is not necessarily a bad thing. It just does give you a certain framework on the world. Um, and so that humility of realizing, well, not everything can be fully explained by science in the way that we think of it, which is, fully replicable, fully kind of verified experiments that produce the exact same thing every time. So there's a humility in that, which I agree. I think if there was more of that in the sciences, that would maybe lead us to a better kind of clearer, not clearer place, actually, in a way, it wouldn't be clear, but in a maybe a more realistic and accurate place in terms of what the world is like. Which is, it's like, I mean, you've probably read it. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is a
Hmm.
great book for that. I mean,
That's great. Yeah.
people have certain hang-ups with it, but in
Hmm.
general, the idea of someone from the academy kind of finding the failings of science in terms of being able to fully explain our experience of the universe and then having a huge mental crash out as a result. But it's a helpful book in that way, I think, to kind of go through that journey, especially for people like me who I'm not in the academy and I don't have a scientific background. So as a layperson, again, kind of going on that journey through kind of very rational ways of thinking and logical ways of thinking in terms of the Western sense of logic, but seeing where there is a limit to that and that you have to have some degree of humility when you approach these things. Yeah, I think there is a lot of utility in doing that.
It's interesting with your law background. I wonder how that's been changing lately, but that would take us down another path. But I'm thinking of Chris McCandless again. There's something I feel like I want to get into a little bit of how we kind of crave to feel that feeling of light or of oneness with everything, or sort of dissolving even, or that can come with all these things we've been talking about: music or poetry, philosophy, even science, actually. When you have that moment in the lab, where something clicks and these kind of moments seem to be what do something very important to us. And I wonder about in your own life, or how you think about this, and how that too can be, back to that cautionary thing where, because, I'm thinking of Chris McCandless in those moments where where we feel that he has found love in a sense. He loves himself, or he loves the world, or he feels kind of part of something. I think there's something about that we're all craving and finding, and all these things we're talking about too, but that can also be dangerous, or like we need that logical side too. I don't know if this
Yeah,
is making sense to you, or you felt this in your own work and life with all these things you're
totally.
juggling, but
Yeah, well, I think you're touching on something I'm kind of working through at the moment. Like I've got an essay that I'll share in the next, I don't know, few months on Substack, which is this concept of, yeah, that that you kind of have these kind of more mystical moments, I guess, where
yeah.
you have a sense of connection to the universe, or I don't know, maybe since I mean, my son is now 8 months old, so I think you have a kid, and then you are maybe more opened up on even an emotional level to some of those feelings.
Yeah.
Um, but this idea of like, yeah, that craving, I think, to be fully connected to the universe and to nature around us and to everything else that we see that we get only glimpses of. I don't know where that comes from. I think it comes from something very, very long ago where maybe we lost something along the way as a species. Maybe that's the trade-off for being the species that, for whatever reason, we have the most capacity for certain forms of kind of higher thinking, or I'm not a biologist, but we clearly have some capacity that the other creatures that we share the planet with don't seem to have, right? Whatever that may be, with your tool making, language, etc. And the trade-off for that seems to be that kind of desire, that craved, for lack of a better word, kind of mystical connection where you are in sync with. This is a problem. You end up sounding very new agey when you go into this stuff, but I
It's
think
very hard to talk about,
it's
but
hard to talk about without kind of going into that language. But you have that sense where
we know
whatever it
it.
is, you're in the lab and just something clicks. I think again, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, he talks about how does it happen that one day I'm trying to solve a problem and I think through every possible solution, I can't get it. The next morning I'm brushing my teeth and the solution pops into my head. So then where does it come from? Because it didn't come from me consciously. And then this gets into the whole problem of consciousness, but we won't touch that. But that idea that somehow something can happen, that it just is a moment of you jive with something, whether it's music and something just hits you in a certain way, but then maybe a year later the same music wouldn't hit in the same way. Why is that it's the
Mm-hmm.
same music?
Mm.
Um, and then religious experiences, spiritual experiences.
Or even just riding the motorcycle too. I mean, there's that where you're one with this kind of machine and this landscape and this, people have this surfing or many different hiking even,
Yeah, that
you
flow
know,
state.
yeah. But it's not, it's
Yeah.
flow, but it's also, it's not flow like you're just clicking on the internet because that can happen too. I mean, there's a meaning and a kind of presence of your body with it. You're not
Yes.
just, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. I've never thought of flow state as happening on the internet, but you're right. Yeah. So that idea that, when you're actually in the midst of doing something and body and mind and emotions and soul seem to all somehow click. Um, and that oneness with things around you. So in terms of for me, I mean, where I'm kind of working through with that is that idea that if there exists within me, this becomes a version of C.S. Lewis's most kind of apologetic arguments, but if there exists within me this concept that I have this strong desire that I've kind of experienced flashes of from time to time, which is to be fully at one with everything around me, you know. That means maybe taking a logical leap there, but that must mean that there was a time when that was possible. There is a time when that is possible. And so then what kind of logically does that lead you to? For me, maybe showing my own biases from my background that showed me that there is a desire and a possibility of having a kind of personal experience of the living world around us, which requires I think some other person on the other side of that. So for me, that would I would call that God. I would say that there would be some way to experience a personal relationship with the universe through having a personal relationship with God, but that then would then encompass having a more clear and soulful connection to everything around us and people around us. Um, so I think that leads us somewhere. It obviously doesn't give us all the answers. And the hard thing with this stuff is that it does become very personal, which gets very tricky to replicate for other people because also I don't think you can conjure these experiences. So I think when people, whatever religious or spiritual practice you try, if it tries to conjure these experiences of like by whatever means, whether meditation, music, I've experienced it all. So you go along to meditation practices, they try to conjure it in different ways. You go along to a church that uses certain music. I mean, you can try to conjure it. I just don't think that actually works very often. And if it does, it kind of becomes a little bit of a cheap trick. So the difficulty is how do you live your life knowing that those experiences may come and go, not necessarily always at your choosing, and yet taking with you each time the awareness of what that kind of those implications are, right? So this might be getting too mystical for your podcast, but anyway, that's kind of
No,
where
we
I'm
get
at.
quite mystical here. People often ask me if I'm a mystic, whatever that means. I don't even know what that word means, but no, I think it's really important to try to talk about this stuff. And what you're saying is actually a very, very important point. And it's something it's very hard to put into words, but how can we all understand that we are going to find that connection with what's around us differently, literally because we're different spatiotemporal parts of a shared ongoing something, right?
Mm.
Instead of trying to think, oh, they got there through meditation, so that should be my way.
Yeah.
Because to come to your way markers or way making, or there's a kind of compass that you sort of are as a body.
Yeah.
And you get to a point where you can be comfortable with yourself as a body and not comparing yourself to everything. And then you can sort of, what is it? Sort of align and kind of move with that. But you need help from everyone else. So I think an important word is, love, of course, but also care. You tend to write, you seem to write with a lot of care, and you actually make these kind of objects that you actually send to people. You do a lot of extra, it seems, through this what I'm trying to get at here, this kind of noticing, being present, and being precise, but also open, which is a very hard thing to do. And we help each other do it. I don't know if that makes sense to you, that word care, and actually what that means when you're writing or when you're making these objects, and how that might relate to how we can help each other fill into this, whatever we want to call it, mystical, whatever it is. Because you said maybe we lost it, but maybe we're not separate from life. And maybe life is kind of that, and we're finding another way to know it or notice it, right? Maybe that's the top of the mountain that actually is never a top because it's forever since we're
Totally,
going into the
totally.
mystical realm.
Yeah, we're going to the mystical. Let's dive in. I mean, I agree with you that point that like, I mean, you never actually fully reach the top. I don't think you ever get there, but it's a series of peaks And the point is to
It's
kind
more
of
like a fractal kind of
yeah,
something
and
that
you
we can't.
keep going. I think the problem with the fractal or all these things is that it can lead people to despondency or nihilism, which is like, well, nothing matters. You're just going to keep climbing. So what's the point? It's very Sisyphean, which is like, well, if I don't have to keep rolling this boulder, I might as well just stop rolling the boulder. Whereas the
It's not
point
always climbing, I guess. But
is
yeah, I
not
think
always
that's an
climbing.
important point. It's incredibly meaningful and becomes more meaningful, but because it's meaningful, you're co-creating it and extending it.
Yes,
So
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that's right. And never quite kind of reaching its culmination and enjoying that while also realizing that you are going to achieve new uh levels of maturity, insight, all of that stuff does actually come. Like I don't buy into this idea that if everyone's always seeking all the time and you never fully find the culmination, there's no actual progress. I don't think that's true. So, but back to your point about care, I mean, I was reflecting on this the other day with some writers that I meet up with here in Singapore. And the point being, I think all of us had this in common, was like we all actually, when we're writing, are thinking about either a specific person or people who we're writing this to. And it changes depending on what you're writing. Which I think then brings in the care. 'Cause I think if I'm writing to somebody, it's because I care enough about them to write. Now, I mean, I'm not writing horrible, angry screeds. So I suppose if you were doing that kind of writing, you would technically also have someone in mind. But I don't mean that. But everything I write, I do have a person or people in mind that I either have know or I've met or I've interacted with in some extent. And even they might not never know that that's written for them. But I know. So I think that then tempers any desire when you're writing, which I think is partly an immature desire that you learn over time. It's kind of a lazy desire to just to kind of go blah, here's all my thoughts and here's as strongly as I feel them and here's whatever, without thinking how that person would receive that and how would they even understand what you're saying. And would that overly emotive language actually turn someone off from what you're trying to say, right? In my own life, I have to often learn that uh, that lesson in real life, especially with my wife. She's very helpful at telling me when my language is overly emotive for what I'm trying to communicate. So thank God for my wife. But when you're writing, you have the opportunity to not just kind of blast it out. You can take your time and shape it, which is a benefit of the written word over just the verbal word. Um, so yeah, so I think there is care behind what I do, which is what I'm trying to do, which is to make it something that does communicate an idea or a point or a thought. So it doesn't just kind of reduce it to, oh, everything's the same, but does it in a way that's caring and loving to the people reading it so that it doesn't unnecessarily kind of push them away by either being too overly academic or too complicated, but also too shallow or too emotive. That leaves itself open to a degree to people who have a different viewpoint on life than I do, because of course there are many people out there. And I think too also I'm not interested in playing to the choir. I think you could very easily find your tribe of people who think the same way as you and then play to them. And then two things happen. One, you cut yourself off from learning and communicating with other people. But two, I think there is that sense of audience capture where you end up there for, oh, people really liked this one. Oh, I'll write more in that theme. And then before you know it, you've become even someone that you probably not even truly are, like not someone who really is you. Um, so I'm not interested in that. And I've seen that happen to people, people who you kind of over the years read and enjoy what they're writing, and it kind of veers towards the most extreme version of themselves, which is feels like instead of it becoming a maturing that opens up into complexity, becomes a kind of weird inverted version of that. And then yeah, that bleeds into, I mean, what happened with the so I send little pamphlets that I print and hand bind and send them out all over the world to people who are paid subscribers to Waymarkers. In complete transparency, that happened because some people took out paid subscriptions who I did not know these people. And being very Canadian, I felt very guilty for taking their money. And I was like, how do I what do I do? I need to give you something as a gift for like I mean this is not good. This is don't take my advice on this, whoever's listening. I felt like I'm just giving you nothing. I'm giving none of my stuff is paywalled. I just you can read my stuff for free. Why would you send me money? Um, and maybe that's part of that era I grew up of first publishing writing where you publish for very little or for free in journals that, didn't make any money. So that idea of kind of monetizing my writing felt weird. So then I was like, what can I do? Well, actually, the benefit of living in Singapore, Singapore is like the world's transport hub. So postage from here is very cheap anywhere in the world, doesn't matter where you are. And so it actually is postage is very inexpensive. So I thought actually I can print out things that I've written, make little pamphlets and take the time to fold them and put them together, and I can send them out to anyone who wants that. And that also jives, I think, generally with my interest in logging off the internet as much as I possibly can. But yeah,
What you just said is really important to me because this idea of care, I think sometimes it can be too, we think of it as sort of sweet and sentimental, which of course it can be, but it's also a kind of tension, like that tension you felt that someone's giving you money, right? They're supporting you and you feel like there's a tension there. I think that's a precious thing, actually, a hard thing, but similar to what we were talking about before of discernment or something. There's something about, like, I think of care as that sort of space that we try to run away from maybe sometimes because it's so hard, or we try to immediately solve. And I think that is a precious thing, right? And at the same time, I also kind of grew up with that don't want to sell out or something, or you write to all these, you write for the writing, and you um and that can be very hard in this world that we're in now too, of how to be real, like keep real. And what you were talking about, where we, take the kind of vector that's going to make us famous, so to speak. Why, even questioning what that is, and is fame actually healthy? And why are we structuring worlds around certain kinds of things like that? I mean, all of that to me is what I'm kind of thinking about as care, and it feels a bit tense to me. But I wonder if that makes any sense to you at all. This notion of caring, but also it not necessarily being always comfortable.
yeah, well, that's right. And same as love, right? Love isn't just this nice feelings. And so, yeah, I mean, I think if you take that idea that care is a form of attention, attention is a form of devotion, and prayer, attention can be deeply uncomfortable when someone you care about is doing something crazy or destructive, and you still pay them attention, and you don't just kind of leap in to fix the situation, or solve what you think should happen. Which is another constant topic in our household, because I think that very stereotypical masculine feminine size of relationship where the instinct for me is always to jump in and just like, what's the problem? I'll fix it. Which is not actually caring 90% of the time. It's just a desire to solve the problem as opposed to give space to the person and to love them. So yeah, I think that's right. I think you have to be willing, if you're interested in loving people and caring for people and paying them attention, you have to be willing to find that uncomfortable and tense, because you can't solve things for other people. You can't do things for other people. You can help to the extent that they wish to be helped. You can make suggestions. You can model behavior. I mean, I think a lot of that, it's funny. We very much are comfortable with telling people what we think they should do and not that interested in just living that way ourselves and realizing that people will pick up on the way we act. I mean, I think you would have this, I have this. There's people I know, often people older than me, who I admire not because they dole out great advice, but just because of the way they live their lives. And so we see that, we know that, but then the difficulty is actually to be met ourselves as opposed to becoming, fountains of wisdom. So yeah, I think that's right. I think there is discomfort in care and love. But it's worth, like, I think it's worth it. That's kind of the juice of life, right? Like otherwise that whole point of, people talk about, a frictionless life doesn't make any sense. But that's part of the friction. Like you have to find it kind of agonizing sometimes. And out of that agony sometimes comes ecstasy, that really joyous feeling of being in love with someone or caring for someone. And love doesn't just mean romantic, obviously, but just that loving care for somebody. But sometimes it's agonizing, right?
We seem to think that's wrong or something, but it's being able to let that be what it is and not necessarily try to solve it all the time is kind of what you were saying. That can be very hard, but so rich. I think it does open us maybe to more of that feeling of being connected. And
Yeah.
yeah, there's some connection there. Even with the way we've been talking about exploring and sort of going to our edges, I think doing that with a kind of care and discernment and caution is a kind of tension, but then at the same time, it's opening what's possible for you and for others. And I guess what I'm also trying to get at is that we're not, back to that Chris McCandless thing, we're not just alone here. We don't do this just for ourselves, even though it can feel like that. The point is actually caring for others and being cared for, letting ourselves be cared for, which can be even harder.
Yeah, totally, totally. And that thing of like, you actually get more out of anything you experience with another if you do it with another person. Even if that other person strikes you as sometimes quite frustrating and annoying and gets on your nerves. Like I think it's another one of my favorite Waymarker books, is called The Gentle Art of Tramping. And
Oh, yeah.
it's written by Stephen Graham. So Stephen Graham was a bit of a bizarre guy. He was like English aristocracy of the lower sort. He writes in the kind of early 1900s up to the kind of interwar period. He does huge kind of crazy treks and tramping through Russia. He has kind of amazing books on Russia, America, the Canadian Rockies. That era where people kind of have basically no equipment and then go off and live in the wild for months and just kind of like make up as they go along. Anyway,
Jumping on
um,
trains and all this.
yeah, jumping on trains, just doing stuff that you're like, that doesn't, people wouldn't do that now. We have all this
That's
incredible
right.
like technology and equipment, and he's doing it with like boots that are falling apart and like,
Hmm.
anyway. Gentle Art of Tramping is fantastic. I recommend it. It's a little bit of a summation of the things he's learned from a life of tramping. But he points out that thing of like, even if you're tramping along with somebody who's the most egotistical person you've ever met, and you also were very egotistical because, let other people be a mirror to you and all that. Even if you're doing that, you're going to get a benefit out of it because things are going to get shaken up, revealed. Now, you don't have to be that person's best friend for your whole life. I mean, there's a point to which being around people like that isn't healthy. But these
Discernment
encounters,
again.
discernment, right? Yeah. But these encounters and these times with people and these shared experiences with people, even if they're not your favorite people in the world, there is something that's going to come across out of that. I think the word he uses, which is, his archaic language, which is like something healthful will come out of that. Like it's something that is good for your health, um, because something will get clarified. Even if part of the clarification is I can see all the foibles and failings of that person, and that actually makes me realize my own foibles and failings. And I can see where that person is hurting and the things that they haven't been given, whatever it is. So I definitely subscribe to that in theory. The reality of that is obviously much harder to live in, but I'm working on that myself. Um, but to find that place of like actually enjoying connection and relationship with our fellow human beings, um, for the sake of their sake and for caring for them and realizing actually without it being totally self-obsessed, but it does end up benefiting you because it's kind of what we kind of need that, and it for some reason we're built for that connection, right?
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to say it, and it touches something I've had to go through, just when you go through these sort of experiences that can be difficult with, tense situations, doing what kind of taking them in the way we've been talking about here, even when they're really hard and even when you have to just like let that go because you don't need to cultivate every kind of relationship, forever. But you do realize that the landscape has changed and there are new possibilities, even if that just that you now know you can kind of sit with that tension and handle it and still get back to the place of care. There's something incredibly powerful about that in this way that we've been talking about landscape. And you've brought up some really wonderful books. I just want to thank you for that. It's ones I haven't thought of in a while. And it's interesting how many of them have to do with walking through landscapes or hiking or moving in some way on the motorcycle or whatever.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
also really drawn to those kinds of books. And before we go, I want to hear how all this movement, what you think about all that. Because for me, it's so important. I have to walk every day, and walking and moving, it's part of, what I study with the hippocampus and stuff. So I wonder about movement for you. And I'm also thinking of that other story I love of yours about like loving a stranger or something, where you're literally
Mm.
just kind of sitting on the street and you see a guy smoking a cigarette on his break from being a janitor or whatever, just like a normal person like any of us. And you feel this like love for him. I've felt that too. And it feels connected to me to some way that of moving through the world, or almost like being able for a minute to feel like you are in the body of another person or you are connected in that way. So I just want to put all that out there. You can take it wherever you want, but
Yeah, yeah. You're good at these. You set up these really big things, and I'm doing my best to keep up with you. But um yeah, so I think on that example, so that's a real story. I was in Philippines. I'm sitting watching a real person. That's the thing, like I think the danger of the internet, I mean, I guess the TV to a degree before that, but the real danger of the internet, where we are today, is that it fools you into thinking it's no different. Like being in present in the same room as a person is no different than, say, what we're doing now. But actually, unfortunately, there is a difference, and we're never going to fully transcend that. I mean, thank God, but we aren't,
Mm-mm.
despite what our technological masters would like us to do. I just don't think you can. Like, I think we are bodies, and your research would obviously show that. But yeah,
I
we
don't
are.
want to. I mean,
No, I don't
I
want
think
to
the whole
either.
point is the body in a way. That's what's so
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, but we can't, and so I think so. We are bodies. We
Yeah.
are, and actually, even in that, like, say, if you look at it from a theological point of view, which is I'm interested in, the kind of clear shift I've seen over the last 10 years of people really taking time to write and think about the fact that anything that kind of tries to divide your soul, spirit, mind, emotions from the physicalities of your flesh is just unhealthy. It just never leads to a good place. And it leads you to all sorts of kind of strange results. So yeah, so that example, I mean, I'm sitting in a real city in a real place, and across the road from me is another real guy, and I don't think I would have that same feeling of love for him because if I saw him on I don't know, a YouTube video or something, like I just wouldn't because I'm not in the same place. And whereas we're two people occupying the same space and time with our real bodies, this is where we are. We're limited to these little pockets of space and time. So we are here and now with these people. Um, and even if you do subscribe to some idea of, there's some spiritual soul aspect to our bodies and we're in these bodies only for a time, we can't transcend that right now. So you have to find a way to live with that now, as opposed to kind of imagining that one day your soul, whatever religion you subscribe to, your soul is going to leave your body behind and go somewhere else. That's fine, I think. I think if you believe that, you believe that. But that doesn't solve for present day. What are you going to do now with the life that you have now? Um, and I do think it's very embodied. So I think, a book I read recently that I think a review will go up this week or next week at a different publication it's called Good for Room for Good Things to Run Wild. And it's by a Canadian writer called Josh Nadeau. And he talks about discovering that for himself. He went through kind of a crisis in his own life, both a faith crisis, but also like a career and life crisis, and an addiction crisis. And realizing he'd always carried with him this idea that his like body was bad and his mind and spirit were good. Um, but actually, that doesn't make any sense because I'm not just one or the other. I'm both. And so, how do I kind of find a redemption of both of those things? And for him, a lot of that, when you read the book, I mean, it's the kind of book I would recommend to any kind of lost young man, basically. Um, Much more than I would recommend anything by Dr. Peterson. But that idea, instead of fighting lobsters, this book was much more useful because this book was all about like, okay, actually, how do I find a way to enjoy my body and not hate my body? Especially in the concept of addiction, right? Where you feel like your own body is craving something that you know is bad for you. Um, and he finds his way through that in various ways, but it's just like enjoying being on a bicycle and just cycling around the city, enjoying learning how to boulder and being really bad at bouldering and accepting that he's really bad at it and he's going to have to kind of discipline his body into a new way. In like even the way he talks about in a really beautiful way, just like of spending physical time with his wife, not in a sexual way, but just being with his wife, like being together and being present, just one on one, walking around together. Um, so I think it's things like that where I think we have to be careful. Maybe you and I are more this way, where we work and think in this kind of this very mind space. Like I sit here at my computer and I do my job and it's all mind. And then for a hobby, I read and I write. It's all still can be quite disembodied. Um, and realizing that the body and what we do in our bodies and how we use our bodies and how we treat our bodies and how our bodies interact with other bodies in other parts of the world and nature is probably just as important. Um, and other spiritual practices seem to have figured that out. Other cultures seem to have got that balance better than sometimes our own cultures. But for our own part, kind of finding ways to bring that, you know, mind, body, soul, body harmony, Again, I sound new agey whenever I speak, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean, and it's also very scientific actually now and philosophical
Yes.
because
Yeah.
cognition, if we use that word, is actually bodily. I mean, you're not stuck in your head. Your central nervous system is through your whole body. You know, you have neurons in your stomach, for goodness sake. I mean, we are actually thinking bodies. We've just learned that we're stuck in our head. And it feels like that because we're so sensually connected to our head. But you can also live to, you can feel into your body. You can start to feel your body as, a thinking being because it is. And there's plenty of science and philosophy talking about that. And there's no hard boundary between you and everything you're moving through and with your relationships, the books, all those cities you've been through. All that's kind of, participating in the making of your cognition. That's what's happening, but that's not the story we are told. And I guess that's why I brought up that movement of going through the world because there is a kind of agency in that of as you did, as Chris did, like getting out of where you are and awakening to your body in different places and in so doing kind of awakening to different ways of being alive like and maybe developing a way to even feel the love that's kind of there in the sense you brought up that maybe we lost it, maybe we didn't lose it, but we're learning how to feel into it. But there is a kind of thing I want to address before we go, which because you've brought up your wife a lot, and I'm also like we have people who help us do this, and it's so important. That book you just mentioned sounds awesome, by the way. I can't wait to read your review. But I think a lot of younger people, or even us, maybe I don't know about you, but when I was younger, there's a kind of loneliness to this at first, right? To get back to that, and you have this is not we have to learn how to be able to fill into all these things we're talking about. I think that relates to the pilgrimage too, and to the walking, and to I'm not sure how to hold all that right now, but I just want to bring it up a little bit because this discernment, maybe you've even written that somewhere, can feel lonely at first.
Yeah.
And I just want to mark that, right, for people who might be at a different point right now. And you do kind of continue through that, right? Or have you had any experience of that?
Yeah, well, I think you do, and I think the danger is it becomes a individualistic journey. So I think, because it feels that way, and it feels that way because I think it does start that way. So to be fair to anyone who feels like, oh, I'm trying to seek whatever it is, truth, about how to kind of pursue truth and meaning in my life, and it just feels lonely. To an extent, it will never not feel lonely because it is only you can seek it for yourself. So you have to be a little bit aware of that. For me, I think. I've found, I mean, the thing to do is always to keep in that tension again, is that you are actually always seeking fellow travelers. So you have to be open that fellow travelers could look different than how you would like them to look. That you could find them initially quite grating and annoying, or they could be quite challenging. Like I've had people in my life who either I've known for a long time or only known briefly, who kind of piss you off because they say things that I don't like to hear, or the way they say it, or sometimes it's just a little bit of like culture gap, like say, especially when you're in countries that are different culture than your own. People will say things in a way or express things in a way that are challenging for you just even to kind of grasp. But then once you kind of push yourself to move through that, try to understand what they're saying. So I definitely think that. So I think holding intention, this concept that on one hand, yes, you are always only responsible for you. So you have to you have to discover what it is for yourself. But you have to, part of that is you have to constantly be seeking people who can help you, whether they're at the same point as you, whether they're ahead of you, whether they're behind you, whether it's hard to tell where you're both at, but you're trying to seek fellow travelers. Um, I think that helps. I mean, for me, I've been lucky. Yes, my wife, my life partner, we've been together for a very long time. We met very young. We got to experience a lot of that traveling together because we were both still young enough to like be still seeking and being very open. I think when you're young, whilst you have that instinct towards immaturely blasting out your opinions, I think you also actually have more of a thin skin and are more permeable to different things. Whereas over time, we tend to kind of build up layers and think that we know very well, thank you, what all the arguments are, and I've already made my decision. So I think we were lucky in that way. But that doesn't have to be the case for everyone. You can meet anybody at any point, and if you're both willing to move beyond the kind of outer layers of your shells, of your hard views on the world, that can take place at any time. And I've definitely seen that. Other people I know who've kind of met people who they really just vibe with really well at the, end decades of their life. And so you just kind of can't predict that one. Um, for me, I will say I found a lot of it in religious communities, just by nature of religious communities. Not every religious community, obviously, but some religious communities should have people in them who are seeking these things, because that kind of is the telos of religion in an ideal world. People are seeking answers. Now, not every religious community does that, but people, the most of the people, not every person, but most of the people I've met in my life and travels around the world have some interest in some kind of spirituality and religion, and therefore you have that in common. Um, and that sometimes means going along to religious communities that you find weird or scary or strange and you don't understand. I sometimes think about this, I say this to people. It's like I've gone along to things where ultimately I've met a person in that community who I really feel like there's something there and there's some connection and we're kind of talking. And part of the ticket for entry is I go along to the whatever it is, the service, the ceremony that doesn't really do anything for me. But it's part of being part of that community that to respect that that's what is important to this community. Ultimately, you do learn things and you do get shaped and formed by things in a way that maybe you don't even expect. But you don't have to like, that idea that you have to 100% agree with everything that that thing is about before you go along, uh, I think ultimately closes off so many doors, as opposed to being open to things that I don't necessarily know if I agree with or seem to kind of cut against what I think. But actually, there's some kernel in there that I'm interested in, and I'm going to kind of figure out what that is. So that's my 2 cents on that, what I've found helpful in my own life.
I think that's also true in other communities, like philosophy, for example, or
Sure.
different kinds of science. I mean, we also tend to kind of, you can just find your group and then you just say everything they say and you do everything they do so that you're
Yeah.
part of the group. But this is kind of part of what we've been talking about too, is just being able to understand that sometimes your paths are going to resonate and yet everyone's coming with a completely different history, right? Trajectory. And that's what's interesting. So when you resonate, that's wonderful, but you don't need to resonate all the time with all of it. I really like what you say there. Also, as you were talking, I was thinking we're also kind of in a conversation with ourselves. You do come into realizing that you're alive in a place that feels a bit lonely, but as a body communicating with itself, you can also do this with yourself, right? I mean,
Mm.
you can also care for yourself in the way that we've been saying, and notice that the relationships you're having with others and the way you're talking to your friends or your wife or even the person that annoys you is contributing, right, to the way you're going to also communicate with yourself. That just
Yeah.
sort of came. I was thinking of that as you were talking, but I don't know. Is there anything before we go that I was thinking one thing I did want to raise is you're quite funny too. I don't know if humor helps you with any of this, or I just kind of wanted to raise that because, and you also start, some of your fiction is really interesting. Like, what is that one line about the stroller? Like, nobody suspects the man with the stroller, I think, or something like that.
Nobody suspects the father with a stroller.
Yeah, a great
Yeah, that's
first
how I
line
started
for
it.
this fiction piece that you wrote that I will recommend to everyone.
Oh, thank
Conspirators?
you.
Is that it?
Conspirators. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
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 So, I mean, before we go, first, just humor, what does that bring up for you? And then, yeah, I'll have one more question, but
I don't know if humor is important. I mean, I like humor. I think humor can deal with some of that tension, right? Like I think humor is a tension diffuser at times. Um, I think I actually think most of the people I know who like these people who I talk about who people who I respect who seem to have not that everyone's got it all figured out, who seem to have some degree of maturity, have kind of found a way of life, a Tao of life, if we want to use that language, that gives them a sense, when you're with them, you sense their kind of peace and oneness with things. And yeah, I assume I've had the benefit of meeting a handful of people like that, right? They tend to be quite funny. I don't know if you notice that. I think because they don't afraid to laugh at themselves.
mm-hmm.
They're not afraid to laugh at the world because the world is quite funny. Um, the absurdity of things, how things don't make sense, that life is joyful even when it's not always easy. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think humor does. I mean, I think humor is a mark of intelligence, but some of the people I'm thinking about, they're not intelligent in the way we would measure it. I'm thinking of a guy I know in Nepal. We spent 2 weeks with him. Um, and he's a hilarious guy, but he's not trying to be funny. Like he's not doing like an act. He just is. He just is very, he laughs at things. He finds things funny. He's very joyous.
Joy,
Um,
that's good. I think there's a real connection between this joy, this bubbling kind of life, and this absurdity too, in a way, and this
yeah.
kind of almost ecstasy, right? There's a kind of strangeness to the world that it is funny and it is joyful.
Yeah, and it talks, yeah, holding the paradox. I think if you're going to live in the paradox, you're going to have to acknowledge that that's quite funny from time to time, right?
Yeah, and it
So I
does
think
open
that,
the space, right, to be able to look at it from a humorous angle too. That does
yeah,
help you notice the glacier again or whatever.
yeah, yeah, and so I think that's right. So I think also, I mean, conspirators as an example, I was noticing being a new father, things that were funny about being a new father, but then I didn't. I mean, I'm not a humor writer, I don't just write humor, but I think he kind of it diffuses through the short story, the serial fiction I did, which was like, what if a new father was also having to be in like a spy situation, and there's, conspiracies and things happening around him? How would that look? And there would be humor inherent in that, and there would be awkwardness and difficulties inherent in that. So I think that's right. I think humor is one way we kind of it's a different lens to look at things that are in tension. So
Yeah, and it helps with that tension, I think. It helps us kind of move it around, almost musically, kind of play the
yes.
tension, you know?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It's like a way of harmonizing with tension because it's like it's the same thing but in a different key.
Which is what you do in that piece a bit too. I think writing is a bit like that. You're kind of moving the tension around to keep the writer, the reader, the story, that engagement is really interesting. Writing is a really interesting craft of that in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I just before we go, anything you want to say to anyone or any I always ask if there's any experience of love or whatever that, you want to like share, which I know is a heavy question, but
Oh.
I just always put it out there if anything comes relative to all of this or anything at
Yeah,
all. It doesn't have to be necessarily about that.
yeah, no, I'll share this. I mean, this it's hard to talk about love without sounding cliche because the horrible
That's the
thing of getting
point of all
older,
this. We have to try.
I know. But the horrible thing about getting older is how all the cliches start coming true and you're like, this sucks. I was always the guy who's like, that's so cliched. And then you experience the
I think
cliches.
that's a good sign in a way.
Yeah, I
There's
know
a
it
reason
is.
cliches are cliches.
Yeah. But okay, for me, I say this to a lot of people. So my son is now 8 months old, and you have the experience of being a new father. The baby is born, and I was in the delivery room, and people, all my like male friends who don't have kids yet, like, oh, how did it feel? Like, what was your feeling, your emotion at that time? And for me, it's interesting. It's not that I didn't have the feeling of, wow, this is like a baby that now I love. Of course you do. But what I found interesting was kind of identifying what was actually going on in me was that sense of, and this kind of connects to everything we're talking about in terms of interpersonal relationships. I had a responsibility instantly from the moment that baby was born that I didn't have because I wasn't the one carrying the baby. As soon as the baby comes into the world, I now have a responsibility for that baby. And the weird thing is, unlike every other area of life, I cannot really put that responsibility onto anyone else. I can't like defer it. Like, in anything else in life, you kind of always can find some way to offload some kind of responsibility. And I can't with this one. And so there is love, obviously, there's like affection, and the affection grows the more you get to know the baby. But instantly there's responsibility. Like no one's going to help me and my wife care for this child and keep it alive. It's just down to us. That's it. No one else. No other safety net. There's like our system is not like there's other people waiting in the wings to come and take care of the baby. It's like me and my wife. And then particularly we're here on our own. We don't have family in Singapore. So maybe that was heightened. But finding that beautiful as opposed to finding that daunting, that actually if we take ownership for the care of other people. Now it's specific to your own child, obviously, but then extending that out in a kind of a web of responsibility that part of what gives a part of the soil, say, for love to grow in is a sense of responsibility and obligation. Even though obligation sounds like an unromantic, very unsexy word, that sense that actually I do owe, I have taken on the responsibility of we've brought this child into the world. I owe him so much to kind of, keep him alive, but keep him healthy, keep him happy, keep him well. So that was an insight for me. It's specific to kids, but it doesn't really just stay with kids, right? Like it's anyone that I think if you have a sense of love for someone, it's also kind of maybe analyzing or discerning where's the kind of responsibility and obligation that you may owe them, not in a heavy, moralistic, legalistic way, but in a joyful way that actually obligation is a joyful thing as a place for love to grow.
That's very beautiful, really.
Yeah.
And also that you talked about soil a bit, because we've been talking about movement and going everywhere, but also there's this rooted, or this growing, right, that's also happening, that is care too, and letting people care for you and caring for others, and that tension. I guess that's kind of the tension I was talking about too. Parenting is like a very beautiful, difficult example of it, right? Where the way you described it, I have never really heard anyone describe it exactly like that before, where it's kind of noticing that you're locked in a way to life, and that's a beautiful thing, even though it's tense or hard, something like that.
Exactly right.
Even when you make something, right, you're doing that in a way. You're locking yourself into the world in a sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for that. That was just very beautiful, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. I love your work. I'm so glad whatever listener out there introduced us. Thank you so much. I can't wait to read more, so keep going.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was fun. See you later.
Cool. See ya.
Mm-hmm. Okay, folks. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. Since we mentioned poetry here, I couldn't not read a poem at the end. And this one is from Rumi, R-U-M-I. And I'm not sure which translation it is, but it's one that came to mind. And it's called O You Who've Gone on Pilgrimage. Sorry, my throat's a little scratchy. It's been a long day. Okay, here's a poem from Rumi. O you who've gone on pilgrimage. O you who've gone on pilgrimage, where are you? Where? Oh, where? Here is the beloved. Oh, come now, come, oh, come. Your friend, he is your neighbor, he is next to your wall. You, erring in the desert, what air of love is this? If you'd see the beloved's form without any form. You are the house, the master, you are the Kaaba. You, where is a bunch of roses, if you would be this garden? Where, one soul's pearly essence, when you're the sea of God? That's true, and yet your troubles may turn to treasures rich. How sad that you yourself veil the treasure that is yours. And that's the end of the poem. So don't veil the treasure that is yours today, okay? It is a treasure. Also, thanks for supporting the show, and sign up on the Substack if you want more information. And I also have a book coming out about the navigational approach to mind. It's called Holding Paradox. I sure would love to hear what you think about it. And another book will come out soon from Harper One that I'm very excited about, and it's about being alive. So I can't wait to share those with you all, and I really hope you'll let me know what you think about them. Okay, bye.